Shelton, from a learning platform or a learning school perspective, I want to know what do you think is the future, especially in terms of online learning. So, someone, let's say, let's think of an entrepreneur who is thinking of getting into an online learning business. Why would you ask him to think about communities?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, right? I think speaking to an entrepreneur who wants to start something that's online learning or learn business online, I think you want to. I would say, looking back, I mean, similar to what Ashdeep said, right? Looking back at offline, look back to why your college campus experience worked, right? What is that infrastructure that you need to put in place, right? So I think even before getting to the community question, I think the question you need to answer is, where do I put people together? And what kind of people together am I putting, right? And then you can then you kind of can hit some tangible aspects of what kind of people do I want to put together? What are their goals? I think communities center or communities that have great outcomes always come together if they have a common purpose or a common goal that they want to achieve, right? So you put people together who have a common goal or something that they want to achieve, something that they want to overcome. You put these people together in the same room. You are the enabler for that goal, right? So you're putting together the content, you're bringing together maybe the guests, right? You're structuring everything, you're creating that environment to learn. But when you think of it in this, like when your design is so intricate like this, I don't think there's a way like that you can avoid a community experience, right? It always be that, and I think that has the best outcomes. And something that I often think about even in recent months, especially with online, is thinking about what enabled these things to happen back in college, right? Why do certain colleges have great outcomes whereas others don't, right? And some of these are simple things, like you wonder why colleges which don't track attendance, right, have some of the most amazing events that happen over there, right? I'm not saying the same utility applies here, but here also in the online space, you got to think about like what are these levers that exist. If I remove them, how can this enhance the experience? So if I add in a constraint, how can this change the experience?
Can you also talk about some of these second order learnings that you feel that community adds, especially from a STOA perspective, where people are learning to be a business executive?
Yeah, so I'll remove the learning component, like the curriculum, from the equation, right?
Right.
A lot of people are coming to STOA to get a solid business education, right? Some of them are founders, some of them are seasoned, veterans from the industry, some of them are early career professionals. Just putting a combination of these folks in a room, they have so much to learn from each other, right? That diversity works in your favor, where, and this is why, going to Ashdeep's point of online, why online this enables as well, is you have someone from, building, say, a startup in South India, talking to someone from Northeast India, learning about, their, how they built X, right? Just the second order effect here is just peer-to-peer learning. That's what I would say, right? Learning from each other's experiences, learning from each other's stories, I think more than anything, and getting inspired by that. And just, I think having, something that, we try to push at STOA, just having that positive sum mindset, right? Which I think, it's common now in a lot of these young startup circles that we also are part of. I think that is a key second order effect. I think at least in our business or in our community.
Sure. Awesome. Ritu, any quick comment on that?
I'll just say one thing, whether it's offline or it's online, every single individual as a learner has their own respective style of learning and absorbing and assimilating that information. Some of us learn really when we have a professor who's very structured, notes, submissions, dates, deadlines. Some of us prefer professors who are very chilled out, and some of us just prefer learning by reading a book or watching YouTube. What digital education allows you is creating multiple such experiences on one platform, synchronously or asynchronously. And to Shelton's point, there's so much tacit knowledge that's available from your peers that you can really, really evolve with. So the way things are going to move, everybody needs a mix of both offline, digital, synchronous, asynchronous. And I think that's what communities are going to be enabling at any point of time now.
Awesome. So I want to shift gears a little bit, since, almost everyone who is doing, a learning business the most profitable, at least in India, the model that I've seen is the cohort-based course model. And I think both Stoa and Nextleaf started with that, and Front Row has been sort of, I think they still have a subscription first mindset, but would love to know from you guys, one very critical thing around how do you construct a cohort, in terms of number of people, duration. So Ritu, any quick comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of my key learnings has been when you're designing these particular programs, if you want community, first of all, define what role would community play in it and whether or not it plays any role. So for example, if today's session is a learning session, can community play a role here? Two, a 2-day workshop or a 4-day workshop, is it enough time for people, the colleagues, the learners to actually spend more time, given all of us are working professionals, because that's the case with Nextly. We have our day jobs. We're barely scraping through those 2 hours of sessions. Do we have enough time to, interact with each other? Versus doing a program which is say 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months, and then being able to create multiple spaces, opportunities for interaction. And I think that should be your key fundamental, parameter or a filter to say what kind of courses I want to design and what kind of community experiences I want to design to enable the final outcome, which is at the end of the day, always a learning outcome. So,
Sure.
And hence this, I'm not going to talk about size because typically at Nextly we work with larger formats, but at least when it comes to duration, we're very clear what works in the community sense, what doesn't work in the community sense for us.
Sure. So know your community, figure out what is the timings that will work, design the program accordingly. I think beautiful in terms of timing. Yeah. So I was saying from Stua's perspective, you guys have sort of run multiple programs. You started with smaller duration programs initially, right? And now you have this 6-month, alt MBA, full-fledged, almost like a degree program. What has been your learning in terms of, size versus duration, that correlation?
I think for us, a lot of it, so something I would say for anyone who's trying to build anything, or CBC, I would say experiment, right? Experiment, talk to your customers as much as possible, get real-time feedback, and just keep experimenting until you find a sweet spot, right? And when you find a sweet spot, when you have sort of better outcomes coming from that, or then you're getting that sort of positive score from your learners or from your customers. I think for us, especially given that we're doing a business education program, in our first cohort we had a 3-month format which was sessions every day, and we realized, okay, that's not feasible because it worked at that early point because it was early COVID days, people had taken time off, the world was in a sort of chaotic space. But then what we realized later is that people do need time for themselves. People do have, especially given a lot of our customer base are working in startups. All of us are working in startups here. We know that grind really never ends, right? And I think also what your learners can manage, I think I'll tie this back to Ritu's answer as well, which is you have to understand what are your learners' learning styles, right? Each one has their learning style. And what's that baseline that you can deliver to everyone consistently, right? Can you deliver a solid baseline? Because then everything on top of that is a bonus for every learner based on their style, right? Some folks will prefer peer-to-peer, right? They might not be the most interactive in classes, but they are the ones, driving conversations, say, in your community space or with their teams. So I think for us, a big learning over the last year has been figuring out what is that right number, what is that right duration, and given that again we're a business program, what are those modules that we need to put in place, right? We've experimented with our modules and formats quite a bit over the last year, and I wouldn't say we are still 100% solid. We're still experimenting with new things. So even with every new program, there at least 50 to 60% is structured, 40% is new experiments and new ideas that we're trying to include, trying to design to put in the program without compromising as much as possible the overall user experience.
Got it. So today, for the 6-month program, what is the size of cohort that you guys are targeting?
Right now, it's about 100 to between 100 and 120, I would say right now.
Got it. Whereas, Ritu, for a 4-week program, what is the size of cohort that you guys target?
So for our APM fellowship, we typically look at about 350 odd folks, whereas for our 2 week sprints, we're looking at about 40, 50 or 30 to 50 is what the number that we play around with.
Got it. So I think one thing that I have observed, and again, this is also based on some of my conversations with you guys earlier. It's very difficult to make people complete a course unless it's really personalized and really focused on them. So if it's a longer course, a shorter cohort generally works, and if it's like well priced, only then you'll see people completing those longer courses. But if it's a shorter course, you can still manage like a large cohort. There is this community like cohort of DASB which does, I think, almost about 4,000 members for a 4-week cohort. So that might still work for a smaller cohort, but you'll see a lot of drops if you keep heading members. On that note, Ashdeep, from a subscription focused community, how important is this dynamics of duration of course, size of cohort?
So I think there are two factors we generally take care of, right? One is what kind of outcomes we want users to have, right? That becomes a primary derivation, as Sheldon also mentioned. Like you have to be
constantly in touch with the users. You have to constantly talk to the students and understand what they want. And basis that you need to decide where in the journey will they get, right? Second is what kind of personal attention do they need, right? Both from peers as well as from the quote unquote instructors, right? So that decides basically the size of your class or a cohort, or like whatever word you want to use for it. And that's where you also define the timeline. For example, currently we have different models. We have, as you mentioned, larger cohorts, smaller durations. We have 300, 400 users over a week-long workshop. We have 20 people cohorts for a 3-month, 4-month courses. So those kind of things, that are the things we are experimenting with. And it, as Sheldon mentioned, it boils down to what works best for those outcomes. As simple as that.
Got it. And from a subscription community perspective, do you think, like, for you, majority of revenue or majority of value add is, at least in terms of perception of value for your customers, is into these cohort-based courses, or things beyond that as well?
That's very interesting. So
how significant is cohort-based course in the overall subscription that you guys designed today?
Yeah. So that's something that's very interesting. If you ask users point blank what's more important, they'll say smaller cohort size. Like, I want to learn directly from the professor. That's why we actually introduced one-on-one mentorship sessions. Like, you literally get half hour with the expert every week to just discuss what you want to learn, what is your doubts, what are your next steps, etc., etc. But if you look at it, they actually, when you actually try and understand their perspective, you will see that they actually want friends. So it becomes a balance between the both. So if you ask them, they will say first comes learning, second comes networking, and third and validation they will never even speak about, right? But their actual inherent bias is validation, then networking, and then learning. So
usually the perception is towards learning, but
yeah.
So people will come for learning and stay for the network or stay for the community.
Yes. Or I would say they will stay for the positive feelings they're getting, right? For example, positive feedback loop that I generally call it, right? And that's what we call quote unquote validation. Basically, like, for example, अगर आप गिटार बजाते हो तो कोई बोलेगा कि आप अच्छा बजाते हो तभी आप continue करोगे. If you play chess, you will only continue if you win the game, right? So that validation becomes a very key factor in any community you're building. So, and that only comes with a certain size of cohorts. For example, we have even if you make a large cohort, so for example, even in our early days communities where there were no cohorts, we would find there are 5 comedians who have made a separate group on Instagram. right? Because they got in touch, they vibed with each other, they made a separate call. So for me, whatever I've observed so far, generally 10-15 member groups is the ideal balance, where they can make friends, where they can learn, where they can constructively give each other feedback, where they can grow together.